Now here's the real question: hammer fire or striker fire? Montage. In this video, we are going to be explaining the differences between hammer fire and striker fire and which one's better. Both mechanisms have the same end result. It's just how you get to that end result is the difference. The way a gun works is that something needs to hit the primer on the back of a cartridge in order to ignite the powder and send the bullet forward through the barrel. Hammer-fired guns use a hammer to hit a firing pin, which then sends the firing pin forward, hitting the primer on the cartridge. These hammers can be external or internal. I also want to add that there are different types of hammer-fired guns. We have single action, like this Wilson Combat right here, which means the trigger performs one single action to release the hammer. There are also double action guns, which means that the trigger performs the cocking and releasing of the hammer. Lastly, there are double action, single action guns. This means that the first pull of the trigger will be a double action, as long as the hammer is not already cocked. And then after that first shot, the slide will cycle, and then the following shots will be single action. Striker-fired guns, on the other hand, skip the hammer entirely and uses an internal spring-loaded striker to hit the primer directly. Now, what does this mean for you as the shooter? To be honest, not a whole lot if we're going strictly based off of hammer-fired versus striker-fired. However, let's get into a little bit more detail and discuss the differences.
We've got to celebrate our differences.
First off, let's talk about the trigger. Hammer-fired guns often offer a smoother, more refined trigger. This is because in single action models, once the hammer is cocked, there's little resistance, leading to a light, precise pull. Hammer-fired guns can also incorporate more mechanical refinement due to extra parts like the hammer and sear, which allow for better trigger tuning. In a striker-fired gun, the trigger pull works against the internal spring that is responsible for cocking and releasing the striker. And in many striker-fired guns, like a Glock, pulling the trigger will actually pull the striker further back to give the striker enough power to hit the primer. This is considered a safety mechanism, but the shooter does need to overcome that resistance to complete the trigger pull, which can make the trigger feel heavier or less refined than a hammer-fired. Striker-fired guns by design are simpler and have fewer moving parts. While this is an advantage in terms of reliability and maintenance, it can limit the ability to fine-tune the trigger to the same level of precision found in hammer-fired guns. Striker-fired pistols are often considered simpler and easier to use, especially for beginners. There's no external hammer, meaning no manual safeties to engage, and generally fewer moving parts. You load your magazine, rack the slide, and you're good to go. The trigger pull is consistent from the first shot to the last, which is one less thing to think about when you're shooting. On the other hand, hammer-fired guns are a little bit more complex. They often come with features like manual safeties and decocking levers, which means more things to think about before you fire. For example, you may need to disengage a manual safety or be aware of whether the hammer is cocked or not. In some cases, like double action, single action pistols, you have to pull the trigger through a longer and heavier stroke for the first shot. Now let's talk size and weight. Striker-fired guns are typically more compact and lighter than hammer-fired guns. Why? Well, striker-fired mechanisms don't require a hammer, which means the design can be much more streamlined. The internal components are simpler and there are fewer parts, allowing for a smaller, lighter frame. Because of the simplicity, striker-fired guns often have a more minimalist design, making them ideal for concealed carry, or if you want something that's easier to carry around without feeling weighed down. Hammer-fired guns, on the other hand, are usually bulkier due to the extra components like the hammer, safeties, and decocking levers. This can make them feel more solid in the hand, but less ideal for carrying if you prefer something lightweight. Now let's talk about reliability and durability. Neither is inherently more reliable. It's all really about the manufacturer's build quality more than anything. Let's start with striker-fired guns. These pistols are typically known for their high reliability. We all know Glock is the kind of golden standard when it comes to reliability. Now, hammer-fired guns are incredibly reliable as well. Their internal hammer mechanism is robust, and when properly maintained, they're incredibly durable. However, the hammer mechanism does add a bit more complexity, which can mean slightly more parts that could potentially wear out over time, especially if the gun is used heavily. Also, if it has an external hammer, theoretically something could get in the way of that hammer, such as dirt or lint for you pocket-carrying degenerates out there. But the hammer-fired design has withstood the test of time. For example, the classic 1911 has been around for over a century and is still a favorite among many shooters for its durability. While the hammer mechanism adds that little bit of complexity, it doesn't necessarily make these guns less durable. As long as the gun is cleaned and properly maintained, a well-built hammer-fired gun will last a long time. And many models like the Beretta 92 that I have here or the 6 Hour P226 have proven their reliability in military and law enforcement use. Now, the question a lot of you are probably thinking, which one is more safe? Well, both are safe when handled properly. The real difference lies in the safety features. Typically, a striker-fired gun will have more internal safeties and hammer-fired guns will have more external safeties. So one is not more safe than the other. Striker-fired guns are designed for simplicity. They typically feature a trigger safety, which prevents accidental discharges unless the trigger is pulled properly.
We found that the P320 will fire if it is dropped at a certain angle.
Many also have an internal firing pin safety, blocking the firing pin unless the trigger is fully engaged. Some models, like Glocks, have a partially cocked striker, which means if the internal mechanisms fail and the striker is released forward, then the striker won't have enough power to make the gun go off. It's only when the trigger is pulled is when that striker will be moved further back and cocked fully. The lack of an external manual safety means you don't need to worry about flipping a switch in a high-stress situation, but proper trigger discipline is crucial. Although there are some models with some thumb safeties if you do prefer that on your striker-fired guns. Hammer-fired guns often feature manual safeties like a thumb safety that prevent the hammer from falling unless disengaged. Some also have decockers, allowing you to safely lower the hammer without firing a round. These extra features offer more manual control, but they do require you to be more aware of the safety position and whether the hammer is cocked. So for striker-fired pistols, trigger discipline and safe holstering are key as they often lack a manual safety. Hammer-fired guns will give you extra control with manual safeties, but they require you to actively disengage them before firing. So which one should you choose? Well, it all depends on your intended use. Of course, it depends. But I'll give you my opinion. For duty and defense, striker-fired guns are often preferred for simplicity and reliability, while some still choose hammer-fired guns for its trigger control and external safety options, but both do have a proven track record in this space. For competition, I personally opt for hammer-fired pistols, especially single-action models like 1911s, due to their crisp, light triggers for accuracy. I've ran my Staccato P, here it is, in the tactical games events and haven't had a single malfunction. Although you will see a lot of striker-fired guns in the competition space as well, though they typically have many modifications such as aftermarket triggers to compensate for their tiny relatively mushy triggers. For concealed carry, I prefer striker-fired due to them being typically lighter weight, fewer external controls, and a consistent trigger pull. Most people I know carry striker-fired guns as well, but you do have your hammer-fired 1911, 2011 fanatics out there. You know who you are. And for home defense, either one can work. It really comes down to what you train with and feel comfortable handling under stress. For me, I always gravitate towards my hammer-fired guns when I'm at the range because I enjoy shooting them more. So I have more training with those guns. And because of that, I lean towards those guns I train with the most for home defense because I'm more comfortable with them. But I am curious to hear from you guys on if you are team hammer-fire or team striker-fire. So put that in the comments below. But we do come out with videos every week here, so make sure you are subscribed to my channel. It really helps a lot as YouTube does not like us gun tubers. Well, thanks for watching and we'll catch you next week.